It's too late, Rhaenyra. Alicent.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and these are all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 3. This was the first episode of the season without any murder, but trust me, this is just the calm before the storm. I am just so glad to see Game of Thrones back at this level of quality after, let's face it, some disappointing moments in the original series. I feel like when the dragons die in this show, then the deaths are going to be earned, and not like that time Dany just forgot about the Iron Fleet.
Well, Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet.
In fact, to commemorate that moment, we have this brand new parody shirt that shows a dragon rider faced with the decision: scout ahead for ships or forget about the Iron Fleet. We designed this and other parody merch at our merch store, like the Twins Pointing meme and the Team Black and Team Green baseball tees. Guys, you can find links for all of those below, and thank you for shopping and supporting our channel. We start with the opening credits, but this time there's extra embroidery on the tapestry to represent new scenes in this season. Instead of depicting the death of Lucerys Velaryon, we see Jaehaerys' funeral procession. And notice how this stain of blood actually goes through his neck. It's freaky. He's also surrounded by candles, likely to represent the prayer candles and the Sept. We also see the rat catchers hung from the gates. Then we pan to the titles. Now, in previous episodes, there's been a thread still weaving under the titles, but this time there is blood. This represents that everything is about to get more brutal and history will literally be written with blood. We open on a farm in the Riverlands. A new knight says his sword is
Well enough for killing Blackwoods.
So this is a Bracken. All last season we saw little crumbs of the Bracken and Blackwood rivalry. On Rhaenyra's marriage tour, a Blackwood and a Bracken got into a duel, resulting in a suitor dying. We also hear a complaint by House Blackwood against House Bracken in the small council.
It is Lord Blackwood's contention, therefore, that the Brackens move the boundary stones in the dead of the night and put their horses to graze in his field.
Now, their rivalry is legendary and intense. Think Hatfields and McCoys. But they actually changed this battle from the book. In the book, this is a planned military offensive, but here it's just a land dispute gone wrong.
More similar to Bloody Kansas.
Yeah, it is similar. How do you know about Bloody Kansas?
I read.
Now this is great because it's a microcosm for the entire war. Fundamentally, this is all one big misunderstanding. Alicent claims that she would have never pushed for Aegon to take the throne if it wasn't for Viserys' words the night he died.
You told me you wish for Aegon to be king.
But there was so much bad blood and bad will between the Greens and the Blacks that the mumbled words of a drugged up dying man started a civil war. Also in this scene, we see how the rumors about Rhaenyra and Aegon are spreading to the other houses. The Blackwoods say that Aegon is
No true king.
while the Brackens call Rhaenyra
Is a kinslayer.
Now when they cut to the battle aftermath, to me it actually looked like an American Civil War photo with the bodies bloodied and strewn everywhere on the landscape. It's a nice reference point for our fantasy Civil War. The American Civil War was one of the bloodiest wars in our history, and this will be one of the bloodiest wars in Westerosi history. This shows us how anger becomes like an addiction for these characters. Rage becomes this self-defeating cycle where anger just feeds and creates more anger, like two fires that feed off of each other. And what makes this so brilliant is that we can all relate to this. I mean, we're not all lucky enough to have our own dragons, but we do all have our own bad habits or self-defeating cycles. For instance, I struggle with facial tics. Whenever I get stressed, I just want to squeeze my face or clench my jaw. So I needed something to help me forget those bad oral fixation habits and replace them with a positive one. And that is why I started using Fume. They're the sponsor of this video.
Oh, that looks like a vape.
Actually, Doug, it is not a vape, it is not electronic, and it doesn't have pods filled with potentially harmful chemicals. Instead, it has these plant-based cores that are infused with natural flavors to create natural flavored air. You see, the flavored air category is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking. Fume contains no nicotine, it is not addictive, and it contains non-toxic flavors. Instead, it contains plant-based flavors like spearmint ice, orange vanilla, black licorice, and my current favorite, cinnamon hearts, which taste like warm cinnamon spice. With flavored air, you can satisfy your oral fixation through a passive diffusion system that does not use electronics, vapor, or combustion. But mostly, I like that it just gives me something to reach for when I am feeling anxious. It even has movable parts for fidgeting that make an incredibly satisfying sound. Fume makes switching easy and even fun. They have thousands of 5-star reviews from their more than 300,000 customers who have used Fume to change their lives, and you can be their next success story. So for a limited time, use my code ScreenCrush to get your free Fume base when you order your journey pack today. This is the all-new magnetic stand for your Fume device. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use our code ScreenCrush or scan the QR code on screen to get your free Fume base when you order their journey pack today. Now back to House of the Dragon. We cut to Sir Eric and Eric being buried in the same grave. Now it's very symbolic given that they came into the world together.
We were once only two buddies, yes.
This is also metaphorical, showing how both sides of this war are leading the dynasty of the Targaryens into the same place, into the grave. Notice that Rhaenyra throws a handful of dirt to the grave. Now remember, burial is not a Targaryen tradition. Targaryens are cremated by dragonfire. Allowing the brothers a proper burial and contributing to it is a sign of respect to both knights. I also love that Rhaenyra's overcoat is black. Obviously, the Targaryen colors are red and black, but it does add another level of respect to the burial, like Rhaenyra is in mourning clothes. Also, if you look really closely, her jacket is quilted and resembles dragon scales. Two things to note here. First of all, Jacaerys is becoming more angry and vengeful like Team Green.
He is the basest of villains, not of those who sent him.
Now, I'm not saying he's wrong for this or that it doesn't make sense. After all, they killed his brother and just tried to kill his mom. But it highlights how war brings out the worst in people. Before the fighting, Jacaerys seemed like a nice kid, or at least nicer than his uncles, Aegon and Aemon. But after dealing with loss and fear, he's slowly turning vicious. I also want to highlight this line from Rhaenys.
The young men have taken the bit in their teeth they wish to punish, to avenge.
Throughout the season so far, it's constantly women trying to rein men in. While the men are brazen and reckless, the women urge caution. Now, I've said it before, but at its heart, this is a mother's war. Alicent is scared of what will happen to her kids if Rhaenyra takes the throne.
If Rhaenyra comes into power, your very life could be forfeit.
And Rhaenyra, especially now, knows that her kids are in danger. While the men run headfirst into war, the women try to prevent it because they want to protect their kids. She also says this.
Soon they will not even remember what it was that began the war in the first place.
Now, if you remember, all the way back in the first episode, Rhaenys said that these soldiers have never seen real battle. They view it all as a game because for them, it's always been a game. They've cosplayed combat through tourneys and jousts.
These nights are as green as summer grass. None have known real war.
So now, these men don't understand the gravity of real war. We see that later in the episode with Sir Gawain Hightower when he insists on staying at an inn. He doesn't even understand that he is in real danger.
I assure you, my nephew will not begrudge me a night of comfort.
Part of the reason this war gets so bloody is because no one really can grasp the ramifications of actual combat. Rhaenyra also mentions the Raven from the first episode.
My letters to Rhaenyra, has there been any answer?
An apology for her dead son?
I do not care to read her message.
Then we cut to Sir Criston Cole. Now notice that he is shot from below, almost as if he's looking down at Sir Eric and Sir Eric's grave. Fitting, since he is the one who sent them both to their deaths. When he stands up, we see that he's fashioned a new symbol of the hand for himself. Most hands wear a small pin, but Sir Criston is wearing a chain, more befitting of his armor. It's also more conspicuous, probably to compensate for his actual lack of experience. Also, I loved these grand shots of the gates and the entrance hall to the Red Keep. It is such a good way to tell us where we are in the story. At the beginning of the show, it was decked out in red and gold with Targaryen crests everywhere. When Alicent took over, it's muted and she installed a giant 7-pointed cross in the entranceway. And now it's decked out in green to represent Team Green as well as the Hightowers. When he sits down, we see this cool emblem on his chest. Now at first glance, it's the same pin, but when you look closer, you'll notice these two swirls in the same style as the Targaryen crest on the cover of Fire and Blood. These probably represent Visenya and Rhaenys as they were Aegon's closest advisors. There's also an eye which could represent how the hand is supposed to be truthful with the king, i.e., seeing through all his bullshit. Notice that there are cupbearers again. In Alicent's small council, we never saw wine or food. That is a luxury that Aegon has brought back. Sir Criston says,
"You've appointed new knights to the Kingsguard, your grace."
Now, if you remember in Season 1, becoming a White Cloak was an exhaustive process, but Aegon did it in less than a day, which probably explains their less than stellar work ethic. And to make it worse, the new knights are actually his friends that we saw in the throne room in Episode 1. Yep, they nepo babied their way into the White Cloaks. Now, when Aegon hears about the Battle of the Burning Mill, he is thrilled.
Good. First blood in our name.
It just goes to show how differently Aegon and Rhaenyra approach this conflict. For Rhaenyra, war is inherently bad, while for Aegon, war is inherently good. The Maester suggests that they go to the Tullys, and Lord Jasper says,
Lord Grover Tully is a flaccid old fool.
It's kind of funny because the Tullys also had a completely incompetent lord in Game of Thrones. It's like the Baratheons are always going to be headstrong, the Lannisters are always going to be greedy, and the Tullys will always be just a little bit dumb. Also, notice that when Lord Jasper curses, he adds,
Begging your pardon, your grace.
And that's just so insane given the scheme of things. They're talking about fighting with dragons, the potential deaths of millions of civilians, and they're still worried about being too impolite in front of a woman. One thing I really like about this show is that it's actually given us a sense of how large Westeros is.
And your brother Darren's dragon nears fighting age. Call on them to suppress the riverlands.
Alas, they are months away.
We really lost that in later seasons of Game of Thrones, and it just made the show feel less grounded. Here, we have the best of both worlds. The show feels real. Militaries can't just just materialize overnight, but the dragons allow the main players to travel wherever they want, pretty much at will. We see that Aemon is playing with a coin, and it's actually the same coin that he found the night of Blood and Cheese. Even though he's serving as hand, Cole's real duty is wartime consigliere. He's not fit to run the kingdom, but he knows combat. Very similar to The Godfather when Michael pushed out Tom as consigliere.
You're out, Tom.
Remember how earlier I said that all these knights are just playing at war? Well, that's not the case with Cole. He saw real combat in Dorne. It's one of the reasons Rhaenyra picked him.
I fought for a year as a foot soldier against the Dornish incursions.
He may not be learned, but he has real-life fighting experience. Also, Sir Criston and Alicent's relationship is adding a really interesting layer to their interactions here. Sir Criston spent most of his life at the bottom of the social ladder. Even as a White Cloak, he was subservient to the monarchs around him. But as Hand to the King, he's getting his first taste of real power. Alicent's aware that her grip on power lasts as long as her sons heed her. She says so in episode 1.
But if you undermine my voice, both those boys will grow deaf to it.
But if Aegon sees Sir Criston's advice as more valuable than hers, Criston could usurp her in importance. Of course, Alicent will always be the Dowager Queen, but that doesn't grant her a say in anything. When the council tells Aegon not to fight, he makes it about his ego.
I'm as fearsome as any of them.
Now, yes, no one thinks that he's the strongest fighter, but separately, it's also just a bad idea for him to go. If he dies, his cause could die with him, especially since he now no longer has a son. But he's not thinking with his head, he's only thinking with his ego. And then we see Misaria. She says she wants to stay at royal court, and Rhaenyra says,
"One turn for another then."
And I gotta be honest, guys, every time a game metaphor comes up, I turn to Peter Griffin.
He said it! He said it!
Now, it's clear that Misaria is a mirror of Varys from Game of Thrones.
Who's that again?
Well, Varys was the master of whispers for several kings, including the Mad King, King Aerys II. He used his vast spy network to get information and secrets for the royal families, and he's very similar to Misaria. Like her, Varys came from nothing, but grew into one of the most powerful men in King's Landing, always having a direct line to the king, like Misaria just obtained. And because of his upbringing, he always cared about the small folk.
Millions of people, many of whom will die if the wrong person sits on that throne. We don't know their names, but they're just as real as you and I. They deserve to live.
Just like Misaria claims here.
I know the struggles of the small folk of King's Landing. They will be ruled either by you or by the usurper. And only one of you has shown yourself to be merciful.
He truly wanted the best for the realm, not for the monarchs, but for the common people.
Who do you truly serve?
The realm, my lord. Someone must.
They're both from Essos, and I believe they're both from the city of Lys. And also, they were both born into servitude. Varys was the prisoner of a magician, and here, if you look closely, you can see a scar around Misaria's neck. This is from her slave collar, similar to the slaves that we saw Daenerys liberate in Game of Thrones. Big shout out to Heavy Spoilers for that observation. Now, the book is a broad, sweeping history, so we don't get too many details on Misaria and Rhaenyra's relationship. In the show, I think Misaria will be her guiding hand with the small folk. That is, if Rhaenyra can listen. When Sea Smoke starts screeching, Misaria says,
Maybe he's lonely.
Now, I actually think this is hinting to something pretty sad. I think Laenor might be dead. Look, there can only be one rider at a time, and until now, Seasmoke was content to just fly around. The attitude change seems sudden, unless he sensed that his previous rider had actually died. After all, dragons do understand death. Syrax cried out when she saw Arax, and Drogon understood when Daenerys died. Unless, they're going to change the lore and say that a dragon can have a new rider if their original rider leaves for long enough, but seriously, we think that Laenor has to be dead. We cut to Rhaena. Now, Rhaenyra says,
She has pledged an army in return for a dragon.
Now, Lady Arryn asked for a dragon for protection, so sending Tyrax is kind of sketchy. Also, a quick note about the Arryns. The reason the Arryns are Team Black is because they are ruled by a woman, Lady Jane, Maiden of the Vale. In the book, she told Prince Jacaerys, "Thrice have my own kin sought to replace me. My cousin Sir Arnold want to say that a woman are too soft to rule. I have him in one of my sky cells." Rhaenyra remains our rightful queen. In this world of men, we women must band together. She also asked Rhaena to write to Prince Reggio. Now, in case you don't remember, Prince Reggio was the man who offered Damon and Lena a spot in his house. Damon wanted to take it, but Lena didn't, and then she died there. Also, notice that Rhaenyra says this,
"It is safer than anywhere in Westeros."
That's because Westeros would never go to war with the Free Cities, as we heard in Season 1.
I am not prepared to start a war with the Free Cities.
In all of its history, my lord, the Seven Kingdoms have never entered open war with the Free Cities.
So Rhaena isn't happy that Baela gets to stay.
I need Vale here, because she has a dragon.
This is a sore spot. Like Prince Aemon, Rhaena's egg never hatched, but she still hoped that it would well into her childhood. When her mother died, it was assumed that Vhagar would become hers, but Aemon took her first. Damon arrives at Harrenhal, and I love these flying shots. You get a sense of just how massive Harrenhal is, and I love that you can see where the stone actually melted.
What kind of fire melts stone?
Dragonfire.
Now, in case you don't know, Harrenhal was destroyed by Aegon the Conqueror after Harren the Black refused to bend the knee. We even see it depicted on the tapestry in the opening credits. As Damon walks through the castle, we hear the wind whistling through the walls.
It's creepy.
Well, it's supposed to be. In Game of Thrones, there is a lot of talk about the ghosts of Harrenhal. In fact, it's even an episode name in Season 2. So many people died in this so-called impenetrable castle that the whole area seems haunted. And people have been saying for hundreds of years that the castle is cursed, and not for nothing, everybody who became Lord of Harrenhal was either killed or exiled. Also, notice that Damon looks over this meeting hall. This is where Jaehaerys called the council of all the great houses to decide his successor. I think their banners are even still up, although they're in tatters now. In a way, the council is a ghost itself. Without that council, this war would have never happened. If the crown went to Rhaenys, then there would be no precedent for the oldest male to be heir. It's also fitting that that council took place in a burned out hall when ultimately that council was responsible for the destruction of the Targaryen dynasty. Also, when Damon burst in on the dinner, I couldn't help but laugh.
I'm claiming Harrenhal.
Apparently so.
If you look on the walls, there's actually a painting of Harrenhal. Yes, they literally painted the castle inside of the castle. That's hubris, my friend. When Lord Simon Strong calls Damon my prince, he corrects him.
So no, you will find no loyalty to Larys Strong here, my prince.
Your Grace.
Now, we've seen time and time again this season that Damon is struggling with the fact that he is not on the throne.
It is a command.
Would that you were the king.
And this is a great way to show him struggling with his lower status. Now, I doubt that he would ever do this in front of Rhaenyra, but she'll find out about it anyway because Lord Simon will say, "Your Grace," in front of her, and that is going to lead to yet another fight. We cut back to King's Landing. Queen Alicent has a new 7-pointed star belt to go with her 7-pointed star necklace. Also, Sir Criston's equine armor has a 7-pointed star as well. They are decked out in religious drip. Sir Gawain says,
"No one is more delighted than I to march out to war with the Dornishmen."
So there's historical beef between Westeros and Dorne. When Aegon the Conqueror took over, Dorne was the last to submit. It took years of fighting to take Dorne, and Rhaenys, one of Aegon's sisters, even died in the process. After that, there were 4 different civil wars. So the bad blood runs deep. We even see it in Game of Thrones.
There's bad blood between the Martells of Dorne and the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, has been for years.
Then we get the most lackluster send-off from Alicent.
May the Seven guide you. Good night, and lead you not into shadow and death.
It's really interesting that their flame fizzled the second he became Hand to the King. Did Alicent feel like it was a betrayal since he replaced her father, or is she simply upset that she no longer has the upper hand in their relationship? He tried to change the tide with this.
And request that she grant her favor.
Which actually mirrors his and Rhaenyra's first interaction at the tourney all the way back in the first episode. That tourney actually foreshadowed a lot of stuff that happens in the episode that we're going to talk about in a little bit. We cut back to Dragonstone. Now, I love how they talk about dragons the way we talk about nukes.
If dragons begin fighting dragons, we invite our own destruction.
It just makes the level of destruction that they cause so much clearer. Rhaenyra says,
"The Vale and the North will send men. We must give Daemon time."
Now, I cannot overstate how far away the North is. For reference, it took Sir Gawain 3 months to get from Old Town to King's Landing. The North is double that distance and through much, much worse terrain. And that's a big logistical problem for the Blacks. Northmen are fierce fighters for sure, but that doesn't mean that they can get to the South quick enough to fight. Now, remember earlier when Lord Jasper apologized for cursing in front of Alicent? Well, Rhaenyra gets a more intense version of that.
Perhaps it is time for you to think about secreting yourself somewhere safe.
Now, among all these men, there's still a belief that women are too delicate for war, even when they are the ones leading the damn war. We cut to Rhaena leaving the castle. Admittedly, I'm traumatized by Game of Thrones. Whenever I see a family split up, I start screaming at the screen.
Don't do it! Don't do it!
There's also a lot of foreshadowing, but no spoilers. If you know, you know. We go back to the Red Keep. Now, on top of everything else, Helaena now has survivor's guilt.
I warrant they thought I had no more right to grief than they do. Surely they lose their babes more than highborn ladies.
but I think it's really important that Helaena is one of the only people considering the small folk, but she's not involved in the war at all. The last few episodes, they've really tried to highlight that the small folk will be the most affected by the war. They're going to suffer the most. Helaena is like the legend of Cassandra. She predicts things, but no one listens. In her own way, she's recognizing that the small folk will suffer the most from war, but she has no way to stop it. Alicent says,
The stranger comes for us all.
Now, the stranger is one of these 7 faces of the new gods. It represents death. Then Helaena says,
I forgive you.
But what for? She didn't kill Jaehaerys. She didn't, but she may have made it easier. I don't think Sir Criston is solely at fault. He wasn't supposed to be guarding Helaena, but it isn't good that he was having sex with Alicent when he was murdered. If he was patrolling or even stationed outside Alicent's door, he might have heard something. Or if he wasn't so infatuated with their mother, maybe he would have given Helaena her own guard. After all, Sir Eric said that she asked for one.
And why has Helaena the Queen been granted no sworn protector?
The White Cloaks are sworn to chastity so they can fully focus on the royal family safety. When Jaehaerys died, Sir Criston wasn't protecting them. And you can tell that Alicent hadn't even considered that. In past episodes, I've talked about how the Hightowers are emotionally estranged from one another. This is another example of that. Alicent can't see the situation from Helena's perspective, even when caught red-handed. We move on to Aegon and his new armor. Now notice how the new White Cloaks are cheering him.
Aegon the Conqueror reborn.
While the old White Cloaks were stoic and composed. They would never say something like this.
A sight to stir the passion.
The White Cloaks are supposed to be completely devoted to their cause. It's why they're good protectors, at least when they're honoring their vows. But these guys aren't even pretending to take their job seriously.
Of course, Your Grace.
I think it's a given that they will abandon their post at some point this season. Also, Aegon's armor is too big for him because it was originally crafted for Aegon the Conqueror. It's the same thing as a little kid dressing up in their parents' clothes, pretending to be an adult, or in this case, playing at being a war general. Then Larys comes in and does what he does and stirs that pot.
Another is that his grace was outwitted by his counsellors and persuaded to fly to war with Sir Criston, so the Queen Alicent may reign in his absence.
If it wasn't clear already that Sir Larys had no loyalty to Alicent, it's clear now. He just used her as an in, but as soon as someone more powerful and more pliable came along, it was on to the next thing. Criston Cole has already pushed Otto out his hands, so my guess is that Larys will replace Alicent as his most trusted advisor. Just like Misaria is a mirror of Varys, Larys is a mirror of Grand Maester Pycelle. He was the original Maester in Game of Thrones and pretended to be super feeble. He would even pretend that he could barely string a sentence together, but in actuality, he was really smart and secretly served the Lannisters. Larys exaggerates his disability so people will think he's weak when in reality he's been pulling all the strings. Then we get this great shot of King's Landing. I love how they have all these dragon trinkets and souvenirs. It's like an old-timey version of Times Square where you're just accosted by vendors. Now, we get a long tracking shot of a brand new character, Ulf White. This immediately cues us in that this is going to be a really important character for us to follow. And the woman who brings their drinks is actually the same maid that Aegon sexually assaulted in Season 1. In Episode 1, we saw a kinder version of Aegon with the small folk, but the reappearance of his victim reminds us that his vicious side is lingering just below the surface. And then Ulf reveals that he is the son of Balon the Brave.
Wait, who's he?
He is King Viserys' father. He was renowned for his skill in battle. In fact, that's probably where Damon got his skills from. Now, after his older brother Aemon died, Balon was supposed to inherit the throne, but unfortunately, his father outlived him. And that is how we get the whole weird succession situation that opened up this series. Then Aegon walks in and notices that he is with his knights. Even though he half-heartedly scolded them, he still indulges them in their bad behavior. The next scene takes us into a brothel. When Aegon walks in on Aemon, notice how he immediately curls up. He is literally called Aemon the Fierce, but he still acts like a little boy when his brother teases him. He's never been able to grow past his childhood embarrassments, and now everything he does is to make sure that he's never embarrassed again. Even when he says this,
"One is as good as another."
It shows how insecure he is. We've seen other characters have favorite sex workers in Game of Thrones. Tyrion Lannister fell in love with Shae and protected her for several seasons. I'm just saying, a stronger man would have been unashamed that he liked her instead of literally running away like a little boy. We switch back to Dragonstone and we finally get to see that raven from Alicent. Now, I can't make out all of it, but from what we can read, it seems like Alicent apologized for the loss of Lucerys, but also potentially asked for a truce. You can see that she wrote "might wish to spare" and "along with the hope." I can't say for sure, but it certainly seems like that could be what it's saying. We cut to Criston Cole. As they argue about plans, a dragon covers the sun. Fitting because this dragon is actually Moondancer. He created an eclipse. That is such a cool detail. We switch back to Harrenhal with Damon. In his delusion, a teenage Rhaenyra says,
"Always coming and going, aren't you?"
This probably refers to his frequent exiles and returns during her teenage years. And then she says,
"And I have to clean up afterwards."
At that moment, she's referring to Jaehaerys, but this actually points to a larger pattern. At the very beginning of the series, Damon returns, makes some very cruel comments, is exiled, and Rhaenyra becomes heir. When he comes back 3 years later, he takes her to a brothel and almost has sex with her in public. Now because of this, her father forces her to marry Laenor. Even as a teenager, Rhaenyra suffered for her uncle's actions. Also notice that Jaehaerys looks like a baby doll. Throughout the last few episodes, there's been emphasis on children's toys. We see both Helaena and Rhaenyra holding their children's dolls. But toys, of course, are eventually thrown away and discarded, just like the unfortunate children in this war. And then he wakes up in the Godswood. The Godswood is where people pray to the old gods, and we frequently see Ned Stark praying there in Game of Thrones. We do have a video coming out tomorrow where I explain the Godswood in more detail and where we break down exactly who the sides are in this war, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it.
Person, what just happened?
So I think he had a complete delusion caused by this woman, Alice Rivers. No spoilers, but let's just say
she's weird.
Now, just like Tyrion in Season 7, Rhaenyra sneaks into King's Landing on a fishing boat. Also, she disguises herself as a Septa. It's a great choice of disguise, but why couldn't they cover her roots? Now, I know, there's other people in King's Landing with white blonde hair that aren't royal, but still, they could have pulled her hair cover a little tighter, I'm just saying. Also, notice that Rhaenyra walks down the same street as the funeral procession. It's ironic that they called out this.
Behold the works of Rhaenyra Targaryen!
And just days later, she's there incognito. Then they enter the Sept, and just in case you don't remember your Game of Thrones lore, here's a quick reminder. The Seven is actually one god with 7 different aspects or forces, and each aspect has a corresponding statue in the Sept. When Alicent enters, she kneels in front of the Mother. According to Game of Thrones history featurettes, the Mother's prayed to for mercy and peace. Fitting that Alicent is praying to her when they're on the precipice of war. But it also highlights, once again, how this is fundamentally a war between mothers about keeping their children safe. Rhaenyra kneels next to her. And remember, the last time we saw them at this Sept was when Alicent comforted Rhaenyra about the passing of her mother. This location really highlights how far they've grown apart. Where they used to comfort one another, they now talk at knife point. Now, this meeting was not in the book, and that makes sense because the book is an in-universe history book. It only contains known history. Since this is a secret meeting, there is no way it would have ever been recorded. Also, directly behind them is a statue of the warrior, prayed to for protection and skill in battle. This staging of the queens between the mother and the warrior is brilliant. They're facing peace, but if they walk away, they're headed straight towards war. Their conversation is really interesting. On one hand, it's their motherly side that wants to stop the war, but their fierce protectiveness towards their children also breeds it. They pan out again, and this time we see the Smith. Now, the Smith is prayed to when something needs to be fixed. Remember, Catelyn Stark prayed to him in Season 1 of Game of Thrones. In this case, Rhaenyra and Alicent's relationship needs to be fixed, especially because Alicent has some false information. Alicent swears that Viserys changed his mind. When she was younger, we saw that she still grieved her mother.
When my mother died, people only ever spoke to me in riddles. All I wanted was for someone to say that they were sorry for what happened to me.
And even after all these years, she still lights a candle for her at the Sept. And then, the truth comes out.
But he spoke Aegon's name. He said he was the prince that was promised to unite the realm.
And see, this is why you're supposed to give people different names.
Exactly. Now, this says a lot about Alicent. For all she proclaimed that Rhaenyra should be queen, she immediately listened to a dying man's ramblings. Remember, Viserys was not clear at all, but she wanted him to pick Aegon, so she let herself believe it. And she proves that here. She says,
"There's been no mistake."
She's desperate to convince herself that Viserys actually wanted Aegon on the throne, but this also implies that she thinks Aegon is the better choice. Even if it was a mistake, then Aegon was still meant to be on the throne. This is also because she couldn't handle the embarrassment. Aemond never admitted to anyone in the Red Keep that he accidentally killed Lucerys because he would look weak and out of control. Well, Alicent is in the same position. If she admits that she was mistaken, then she'd lose all power, and she cannot handle that humiliation. She just knowingly continues the lie. When Alicent walks away, notice that she turns her back up to the gods. Up until this point, religion is a guiding light for her. From a religious point of view, the right thing for her to do is to try to stop the war. After all, she lied that Viserys wanted Aegon on the throne. It wasn't an intentional lie, but it was still a lie nonetheless. She should try to correct this, but she's not going to. She says herself that it is too late, and now she is literally turning her back on her religion. And just like all the men, she has decided to play a war game. She is no longer thinking about the real ramifications or the people who will die. For her, it's just about winning. Man, that episode was so good, and something tells me that Alicent is going to get a lot more ruthless. Well guys, that's everything that we caught. Big shout out to the writer of this video, Brianna McLeod. You can find her social links below. But what do you think? Do you think this marks a turning point for Alicent? Let us know in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.